Welcome to the Abstract Lit Show, where we interview authors that have written what we consider to be most abstract pieces of the century. I'm your host, Star Avalon, and tonight we welcome our guest. Someone who has now written and published 7 books, one of which is considered to be his most popular and is currently number 11 on the New York Times bestseller list. Jon Ronson, the author of the Psychopath Test, a journey through the madness industry. Welcome.
Thank you for having me tonight on your show, Star. It's been a while since I've been interviewed, but when I got your invitation, I was so intrigued that I simply could not turn down the offer.
Well, thank you for accepting. So, I hear that you recently published a book called The Psychopath Test, a journey through the madness industry, which had seemed to get a lot of mixed reviews, despite the fact that it's been doing incredibly well on the New York Times bestseller list. What do you believe has made this book the scandal that's been portrayed to be?
Well, first of all, when I wrote this book, I intended for it to draw a broad spectrum of intense reactions from my audience. I just never expected that there would be such an uproar about it once the book was published. I certainly never expected for the media to publicize my book to the extent it has. One could say that I owe some of my success with the Psychopath Test to those who tried to attack and publicly shame me for choosing to write about such a taboo topic. However, think about this. I wrote this book with the intent to expose the truth about psychopathy. That being that there are a large number of people amongst us who are psychopaths. Ones which we would never even consider to be anything but normal until my book was read. And practically every single person in the world has at least a few traits of the disorder. It would be impossible for some people to not take things personally after reading it. After all, it does include the hair psychopathy checklist, and I'm sure many did not take it lightly when they realized that they displayed at least a few of the symptoms on the list.
So, your purpose of writing the book was to argue the idea that everyone is a psychopath.
Well, not necessarily that everyone is a psychopath, but the idea that everyone has the traits and ability to be one, if triggered in some way. Also, I really wanted to shine some light on what psychopathy is and dispel some of the common misconceptions that people have about it.
Could you give an example of one of the misconceptions that you discuss throughout the book?
Well, one of the most common misconceptions regarding psychopathy is that the majority of psychopaths are insane and in prison. My book was able to defeat this misconception by exposing the fact that the majority of psychopaths are actually businessmen and politicians. Examples such as Albert J. Dunlap and David Shaler were used in the forms of one-on-one interviews to support this.
Right. You did use multiple interviews in your book to support and prove your points. Were they fictional, or did you actually have to go through the process of gaining access to and conducting the interviews?
Oh God. Some part of me wishes those interviews were fictional. I don't think I've ever been as stressed out as I was when I was trying to get people to agree to be interviewed. You have to understand, no one wants to be portrayed as the bad guy. Even psychopaths realize that, for it ruined their grandiose reputation and status. Nobody wants to be sold out or exposed, so of course, it was quite difficult to get people to interview with me. But even when I did find a few candidates, the interviews themselves were difficult, in the sense that they often had a large influence on my mental and emotional state afterwards.
So then, what made you decide to conduct so many? Because I would think that the more psychopaths you talk to, the crazier you would feel.
Oh yes, that is absolutely the case. But I was very committed to this book. It was my favorite to write, and I felt that it would not be complete without an extensive number of interviews to back up the information that I was providing the readers with. Plus, it helps create good mental pictures, and in the end, I do not regret it. I worked on the book for 3 years, and I do not think I've ever liked the outcome of my works as much as I did with this one.
3 years is a very long time. I understand that you met with a large number of psychopaths in that time. Do you have a favorite?
Well, this might come off as sounding slightly wrong, so pardon, but I do have a favorite. I loved the experience of working with Tony. He was a young adult who tried to fake his way out of prison sentence for assault by claiming madness, and was then committed to one of the top security psychiatric hospitals in England, Broadmoor. The problem is that once he realized he'd made things worse for himself and tried to prove that he was completely sane, the nurses and doctors were even more convinced that he was completely insane. He was so interesting to interview. He claimed that he was a victim of one of the many cases of unfalsifiable diagnoses. He seemed very normal, a metrosexual. He was always wearing business suits and looking fresh. Talking to him made me believe that absolutely nothing was wrong with him. He spoke with tact and wisdom, and honestly, there wasn't much wrong with him, at least not enough to be committed to Broadmoor. Sure, he was a psychopath, but he had a chance at living a normal life, and I was glad that we were able to get him released so he could do so. Very nice young fellow, very nice indeed.
Wow, it certainly sounds like something out of a movie. It's hard to believe that it's actually possible to be committed so easily. How did you come to figure out that Tony was a psychopath?
Well, it took me conducting multiple interviews with others and lots of research before it even registered that he might be. It all kind of fell into place when I was introduced to the concept of the Hare psychopathy checklist, and started to come to the realization that Tony fit almost every symptom on the list. And the more I interviewed him, the more I realized that my assumption was right.
The Hare psychopathic checklist? Could you explain what that is?
Sure. It's a modern-day tool used in the mental health world to rate a person's psychopathic tendencies. It consists of 20 symptoms that you can rate a person by, such as glib and superficial charm, grandiose estimation of self, lack of remorse or guilt, pathological lying, lack of empathy, impulsivity, and sexual promiscuity.
And this checklist is accurate enough to work?
Well, in the world of psychiatry, one would say yes. But I have to disagree. I think that pretty much everyone in the world would score somewhat high on the list because the symptoms truly aren't that unordinary until you look at them as a package deal. The problem is that the more people score inaccurately high on the checklist, the less likely we are able to distinguish the psychopaths from the normal population. But that's exactly what the world wants. Because when we convince people that they have a mental disorder, even though they're truly just feeling normal emotions, then suddenly our drug companies thrive and children are reading books like My Bipolar Roller Coaster Feelings book.
That's crazy. Why isn't this being exposed to the media and more authors around the world?
Because most people have something to gain by not revealing these things to the public. That's the way the world works nowadays. The amount of truths that are hidden. You'd be amazed at what you can dig up if you just search long enough for it.
Clearly, I have a lot of research to do now. I must say, I'm incredibly intrigued. Thank you so much for being a guest on my show tonight, and for opening my eyes.
Well, of course, Star. It's my pleasure.
Well, folks, I'm afraid our time tonight is up, but remember, you can find Jon's book, The Psychopath Test, a journey through the madness industry, on the shelves of the nearby bookstore. I'm sure you will not be disappointed.
Thank you for having me, Star. I look forward to interviewing with you again.
Yes, absolutely. We will have you back here soon. Enjoy your night, everybody. This is Star Avalon with the Abstract Lit Show signing off.